What goes up must come down. Welcome to the Brand Breakdown. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Courtney.
And this is where we're going to track the rise and fall of big brands, from companies to celebs to pop culture phenoms and everything in between. Let's get started.
Well, hello, friend. I'm glad to see you. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I want to pick up today where we left off last week. So I think we ended on Megxit and the royal exit.
Mm-hmm.
And we were going to pick up this week talking about finding freedom, the bullying, and then the Oprah interview, because we left off at the end with everything that was going on as we hit COVID, and that the only way we heard about Harry and Meghan was mostly through other people, other resources, news agencies, etc. But we didn't hear from them directly until finding freedom, kind of indirectly, right?
Kind of. Yeah.
Kind of. Right. So give us the lowdown on what happened there.
Sure. So like you said, after Megxit happens, COVID hits, everybody goes into lockdown, and the tabloids and the press need to keep their clickbait numbers up, right? Everyone's writing about COVID, and the royal reporters are like, well, what are we supposed to write about? So they start rehashing a lot of Harry and Meghan stuff because Omid Scobie, who was a royal reporter, I guess technically still is, he was writing a book called Finding Freedom. And he was writing that with another reporter / author called Carolyn Durand. And Omid really is kind of the face of the book, essentially because he was friends with Meghan. He was very friendly with Meghan. Omid would get a lot of scoops on Harry and Meghan gossip before other reporters. He would kind of flaunt the fact that he was like a little bit buddy with Meghan. There was never anything like officially said like, oh, we're like best friends. Oh, we hang out all the time. Nothing like that. But there was enough there that it was clear that he was not just a reporter. He was a favorite reporter. And other reporters started to referring to him as, like the Sussex mouthpiece or a friend of the royals. Like they weren't even giving him the credit of being called like a reporter anymore or a journalist. They were just basically being like, Meghan's friend said this. So he and Carolyn Durand wrote a book called Finding Freedom. And the purpose of Finding Freedom was kind of to walk everybody through Meghan and Harry's relationship from start to Megxit, basically. So it's our very first place where we start getting confirmation of inconsistencies with Meghan and Harry's timelines and things that they have said. So it's funny because there are some things like, oh, we knew they started dating. We kind of had an idea that they started dating like in the summer. Their relationship was announced. It became like officially broken by the press in like the end of October. We knew they had started dating a couple months before. In Finding Freedom, we got an actual date. We got a date of like, I think it was sometime in early July or early June or something like that. And it was like, oh, okay. So now we know what their first official date was. We have like a time. We start being able to piece together this timeline because Harry and Meghan had always been very tight-lipped about it. They'd always been very tight-lipped about who the friend was that introduced them.
So this is a stupid question, but why would they be tight-lipped about that at all? Why do we care? Like, tell us when you started dating. Tell us who introduced you. What do we care?
Yeah, it was very weird because I think this is something I've like never really been able to figure out. Part of the thing with the royals is that they give a little and they get a little. And like they give us just enough so that we know, like we feel like we know them. Like we see pictures of William and Kate and their kids. And, one of them might say on when they're on an engagement, like, oh, George is loving soccer and Charlotte loves ballet. But we don't know much more than that. Like we don't know how long Charlotte's been doing ballet or if she's any good at ballet or like where she takes ballet class or anything like that. But
so
they
it's
give
just
us like
teasers.
Yeah, they give us enough to make us feel like, oh, I know these people. I'm like on their side. So I think at the start, that's what Harry and Meghan were doing. Like that's just the way the royals operate. We give a little, but we keep most of it for ourselves because even though we're public figures, we're still entitled to a private life. And I think Harry and Meghan they were trying to walk that line. I think that as things progressed, Harry and Meghan became obsessed with the narrative and being able to control the narrative. And we talked before about how every time a story came out, they wanted to refute it and rebut it, and they wanted to correct things. And then it was leading to more problems because they corrected one thing, but not the other thing. So like now, okay, does that mean the other thing's true or whatever?
Well, they were making like, that's one brand mistake after another brand mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't do that. You can't, you cannot defend it. You know, there's this old saying, me think thou dost protest too much. And, but I think that when you refute and refute and refute, or you rebut and rebut and rebut, people begin to think you're just full of shit all the way around, or just full of garbage, not shit, garbage, full of garbage all the way around.
Full of something. Yeah. And it
does have an E on our podcast. It does say E for explicit.
We do have the explicit mark. But yeah, and it would leave them open to like, okay, well, you refuted this part of the statement. Does that mean the other part is true because you didn't say it's not true? You know, like it just, they were getting so like deep into the details and trying to control it so much that it actually just opened them up to more scrutiny and criticism and whatever. So with Finding Freedom, I think part of the idea was like, we're going to tell the whole story and this is going to be our truth. And that's something we hear from Meghan and Harry a lot. Our truth, not the truth. They're not very concerned with what the truth is. We know from Spare that Harry is like, the truth is very fluid or whatever.
Okay. So I just have to interject. I know we're not talking about it today, but I just read like several articles about how Spare might be a little truthy.
Yeah.
Did you read those? I think at some point we need to talk about that.
Yeah. How it's the world's truthiest thing.
Yeah. Like there might be some embellishments there, or some, you know, some internal editing going on, as I say to my kids all the time. I hear your internal editor.
Yeah. There's
rewriting the story.
There's a lot of, as the royal family said after, and we'll get into it, but like the famous line after the Oprah interview was, recollections may vary, which time and again has come back to the Sussexes because people are like, oh yeah, hey, recollections may vary. That doesn't sound accurate. But so with Finding Freedom, Omid and Carolyn basically started at the beginning with their dating relationship and walked us through all of this information that was, you know, it's not theoretically, like it's not really a biography. It's not a memoir. It's not something that they're working in collaboration with Harry and Meghan. This is two royal reporters joining forces to just write the story. And they've interviewed, as they said, hundreds of sources close to the couple and close to the royal family and whatever. But the details that they're providing in this book are like, there's no way you could have known that unless you got that information from Harry and Meghan, because they were describing things like what Harry and Meghan were wearing on their first date. Like Meghan, at one point, it's like, oh, Meghan wore like, I think in Finding Freedom, it was said she was wearing like a black sweater or something like that. They talk about when they went to Botswana and, you know, they were in a tent under the starry skies and da-da-da. It's like, you're the only two people there. Nobody else could have like been the source of this information because nobody else was there to give it, unless every single one of your friends, every single person you've ever spoken to in your life is now collaborating on this book. And so at first people started taking the book as, you know, oh, this is just like, you know, take it with a grain of salt. And then people started being like, seems like Meghan and Harry wrote this book. And we later found out that Meghan kind of did a little bit write the book. She had...
So how did we find that out? I don't want to say something that we can't prove is true. So how did we find that out?
So we know this because during the lawsuit against the Daily Mail, where she was suing the Daily Mail over the rights to publish the letter that she had sent to her father. So what happened is the Daily Mail called one of the Kensington Palace staffers as a witness, kind of. It wasn't really a witness, but they called him to provide some evidence. And this was Jason, I don't know how to pronounce his last name because I think it's a silent K, Jason Knopf. And he ended up, you know, giving information saying like, yes, when she wrote this letter to her father, I did advise her on a few things. I believe there was some correspondence back and forth with between the two of them because she had let him read the letter first, and about, making sure that it pulls at the heartstrings. So she had written the letter almost anticipating that it was going to be leaked, and to the point where she ran it through like a KP staffer and was really like, is this letter going to do the job if it gets leaked? Like, will everything turn out in my favor if my father lets people read this letter? And through that exchange, it also came out that Jason had been involved in working with Omid Scobie and Carolyn Durand with Finding Freedom. And Meghan and Harry had sworn up, down, left, right, we have nothing to do with this book. We did not collaborate with them on this book. This is not something that we have like endorsed or condoned. But it turned out that, Meghan would provide him these very, very long, detailed documents of information to make sure that the authors have these facts correct. And then the authors would send questions to Jason saying, we need information on this, this, and that. And Meghan would respond to Jason answering the questions. And then Jason would meet up with the authors or he would email the authors. And so Meghan was very much involved in making sure that some of the baseline facts of the book were accurate. And, some of them were things about her relationship with her sister, her relationship with her father. That's what we saw in court. In the court documents, we saw enough evidence to know that, like, yes, Meghan did in fact collaborate with the authors to some extent. She was one of the sources providing them with information for them to write their book. And she actually was required by the judge to apologize to the court. He didn't hold her in contempt, and there was no like additional legal proceeding or anything because she was never under oath. She never had to testify, but the judge did require that she make a public apology for not accurately representing her involvement. And she blamed it on forgetting. She said that she had forgotten those exchanges. And that's another example of the Harry and Meghan truthiness, because it's like, how did you forget that you wrote these very long emails providing a ton of personal background information to people who were going to be writing a book about you? Like, how did that slip your mind? So
she didn't forget. She got caught.
Yeah, exactly. She said she was not involved. And I've always wondered if Harry, although I do believe there were parts of the exchanges with Jason as well, that it was indicated that Harry was also aware that, he was aware the book was written, and he would tell Jason things like, when you meet with the authors, make sure they know X, Y, and Z. But he didn't really, the exchanges that we saw were not as involved as the ones that Meghan was involved in. And then we also know, or we very, very highly suspect, that Meghan had a personal relationship with Omid as well, in that, on engagements, when he was covering their engagements, she would give him a hug, and he was invited to certain events, like their last function as working royals. He was invited to that as I think one of the only reporters there. And he was always getting scoops on them. So we have also some indication that Omid might have known some stuff because he was told it directly by Meghan at some point. Maybe not necessarily through the process of writing the book as part of an interview, but it was just information he had because they had had private conversations before. I don't know that to be true, but there's no doubt in my mind that, and I mean, it's been confirmed in a court of law, that Meghan was absolutely involved with the writing of Finding Freedom. How much of it remains to be seen.
Do you know if she profited from that book? Did she make money?
She, as far as I know, she didn't. We haven't had any reports that, either of them received a cut of the profit or anything.
I think the title is kind of interesting beyond the Finding Freedom part, the making of a modern royal family, where they're not a royal family anymore.
Meghan and Harry, they seem to be, there's always these little quips like, oh, they're setting up their rival court in America. And it's like, well, they're not part of not that they're not a part of the royal family, but they're not royals. They no longer are allowed to use their HRH, although they do still hold their HRH. And America doesn't have a monarchy, so you can't set up a rival court because it's irrelevant here. It doesn't matter here. But so, yeah, they've tried to spin it as they had to leave. They were trapped They were stuck. Meghan was, this is one of the first places where we hear all these stories about Meghan like sobbing on the kitchen floor. And it's like, oh my goodness, like she's so depressed and everything is so horrible. Poor her. And it's just this really fawning take on the event. And it's obviously very one-sided. And it's so one-sided that you're like, hey, I don't think you actually interviewed everyone involved because you're not really giving us what else could have possibly happened here. It was just odd. And, Omid and Carolyn, and again, I always like knock Omid just because he ended up being the face of the book. But Carolyn Durand was involved as well. And they tried to make it seem like, oh, Harry and Meghan were going to modernize the royal family. Like, these are the royals you need to watch out for. These are the royals you need to be keeping an eye on. And that had been Harry and Meghan's thing for a while, that like they were going to be.
That was their whole brand. Their whole brand was we're the new deal. Like we're the new deal in the royal family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They were very much like, we're going to change the institution of the monarchy. We're going to modernize the monarchy. We're a breath of fresh air. And so then Finding Freedom comes out with that subtitle of the modern royal family. And it's just like, well, wait a second. No, like not really at all.
They took a big gamble with their royal brand and it didn't pay off.
Yeah, it ended up, one of the things that came out of the Sandringham Summit, which we had talked about, I don't know if it was last episode or the one before that, but we'd actually talked about, the Sandringham Summit. And one of the things that came out of it was that they were not allowed to use their HRH, so their His and Her Royal Highness designation publicly, because it could not be used to help them profit, which is why you see them addressed as like Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, but never His Royal Highness Prince Harry. He doesn't get to use his HRH publicly. It was not taken away. It's like a whole legal proceeding to get it taken away, and they didn't do that. But they are not allowed to use it. The other thing that came out of it was that they were not allowed to use the word royal, period. So Sussex Royal, their website had been sussexroyal.com. Their Instagram account had been Sussex Royal. They had to stop using that because they were no longer allowed to use the word royal. But the reason that the Queen laid that down is that she did not want them monetizing their royal status. And she was like, okay, if you're going to go out and you're going to no longer be working royals and you're just going to be Harry and Meghan, then that's how you're going to be billed, as Harry and Meghan, not their royal highnesses. That was another way that the Queen kind of drew a line in the sand and said, listen, you can do this if this is what you want, but there are going to be rules. And then we have Finding Freedom, where it's like the making of a modern royal family. And it's like, no, they're not even allowed to use that word in relation to themselves. So it's just very interesting.
Which tells me that this book was in the works long before all these dictums from, their Megxit plan were put in place. I think it was probably being written a year before they exited.
Yeah, I have no doubt that there was some talk between Meghan and Omid about, hey, we need to make sure we get like our story out there. Because one of the things that they were criticized for is that the book was released during COVID, during the beginning of COVID, or like that first year, August of 2020. And people were like, this is really tone deaf. Like, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. People are really, really sick and really, really scared and unable to see their family and friends. And you're talking about how you like bolted from your palace because your life of privilege was so hard. But if you look at the timing of it, a book like that it was 368 pages. That was not written, researched, edited, promoted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That was not all done in the 8 months between them announcing their departure and actually leaving. So obviously this had been in the works prior to Megxit officially taking place, just as Megxit had been in the works for 9 months before, at least, since they had the website up in April of 2019. So nothing that the Sussexes have ever done or been involved in necessarily has been a spur of the moment situation or something that was not really, really planned to a T, which just makes it so much funnier in like a not a haha funny,
not
but
a
like
haha way.
Yeah, not a haha funny, but like a peculiar way that they try so hard to plan and they try so hard to control the narrative. And it almost never works out in their favor. It almost always blows up in their face. And it's just like, come on, guys, like read the room.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about after that came out in August 2020. Then I think we didn't hear from them for a little while. And then in March 2021, we get two things simultaneously, really: the Valentine Lowe's bullying article and then the Oprah interview. So tell me a little bit about those two things and how they conflicted and you know what happened. And I mean, I'm telling you, I was glued to the screen during that Oprah interview. I could not look away. It was like a train wreck.
Yeah, I was screaming at my TV the whole time. My husband was laughing at me because I was just sitting there being like, oh my God, I can't believe they would say that. That's so not true. But yeah, so in early March 2021, like a few days before the Oprah interview, at this point, the Oprah interview has been hyped up. Everybody knows it's coming. They had recorded it a few weeks before. It's been promoted in the US and the UK really heavily. And everyone knows March 7th, this interview is going to air and people are waiting with bated breath.
And I will tell you that at that point in March 2021, I was firmly Harry Meghan. Like I was in the Harry Meghan camp all the way up until that interview.
Yeah, I think the interview was a big turning point for a lot of people, actually, because they were like, oh, this doesn't, it was a point where it was another misstep in their brand because it was another point where people could start picking apart the things that they were saying. And the things that Harry and Meghan were providing as evidence of having been wronged, it was so easy to turn around and go like, well, that's not true. Like, that's just like patently false. And you could prove it because they were giving such specific information and such specific examples about things. And I'll talk about those in a second, that you could, it was just like, nope, there's like irrefutable evidence that that's a lie, actually. And that's when a lot of people, I don't want to say a lot of people, but that's when some people started to be like, okay, you know what? This isn't really adding up as much as I thought it was going to. And a lot of people, I know I have family members who were still, you know, team Harry and Meghan, and they were very sympathetic to them. And after they watched the interview, they were like, oh my gosh, like how tone deaf of them, how whiny of them. Like, this is ridiculous and so melodramatic.
Oh, yeah. And for me, when I was watching, particularly Meghan, because I didn't really feel like Harry said a whole lot, I felt like she was acting. It felt like acting to me. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm sure she was sincere in her own way, but what came across is that it was disingenuous. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, wow, this isn't the same perception I had of you prior to this. Like, it felt to me to be so not genuine. Like, it was just disingenuous to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I can't tell you if that's true or not. I'm just telling you that the feeling that was overwhelming for me was, this doesn't feel right to me. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you why. I can't pinpoint for you exactly why, but anyway, keep going.
So a couple days before the Oprah interview airs, it's already been recorded at this point. A couple days before it airs, Valentine Lowe, who is a journalist for The Times in the UK, has published in The Times an article accusing Meghan of bullying her staff at Kensington Palace. And this article was a huge bombshell. And it was basically like, listen, there are, I believe it was 6 or 7 staffers who have spoken with me, given me evidence. They want their story told. They are doing so anonymously because of fear of retribution. And because some of them are still working for the palace, and they are trying to be as discreet as possible while also getting their story out that, you know, she was not a nice person. She would, and this is where, you know, we had kind of heard some stories about Meghan being a little bit difficult to work with. We knew there was a lot of turnover in their office, far more turnover than we had ever seen before in any royal office, especially because some of the people who were leaving were not leaving the royal offices altogether. They were just being reassigned to different different people. So it was like, okay, they're not leaving because they took a new job at a completely different company. They're just switching departments. So why would that keep happening? Why has that happened 3 times in 6 months? It's very strange. And the people who were involved with the bullying article basically were like, yeah, it wasn't just a matter of a culture clash where her, like, you know, hustle and grind American work ethic just didn't mesh with our European laissez-faire attitude or whatever. Like, she was mean and she was routinely making people cry. She was just apparently just a really mean boss. And so it got to the point where a number of the staffers had gone to, again, Jason, who was the guy from the Daily Mail lawsuit. They had gone to Jason and they were like, we cannot keep working for her. Like, we don't know what to do. Jason went to Prince William because he was kind of, you know, the CEO of the Kensington Palace offices, if you look at it as if it's a corporation. And he was like, listen, we have staff. They are very upset. Things are not going well. Something needs to change. Like, people are threatening to quit their jobs and we cannot have that person quit their job. We need them to stay. And William went to, I believe he went to Harry and he was like, what is going on? You need to like talk to these people and apologize or whatever. And that was one of the times when Harry got very defensive about, you know, his brother not understanding Meghan and siding against her and taking someone else's opinion of a situation as the truth rather than his and Meghan's word. But I mean, in the meantime, like, William had seen a number of people on his staff quit. And the reasons that they were giving is that they couldn't work with Meghan anymore. So, and Meghan specifically was like, you know, I was not a bully. I feel terrible if anybody ever misconstrued anything that was said or done as anything other than me just like trying to do the very best at my job. She gave a statement kind of like that, like sorry, not sorry, I didn't do anything wrong. And the way it was handled is that the palace opened an investigation and basically we have no idea what the findings were. We know that the investigation has been closed. We don't know that they found that Meghan had actually done anything wrong. And some people say, you know, because the investigation is closed and they didn't say anything, it must mean that those people were lying. And other people are saying, whatever the palace found, they're keeping it quiet because there's no need to dredge up the past. There's no reason to make those people relive the whole situation, especially because they wanted to remain anonymous. And there's no reason to drag Meghan and Harry through the mud anymore because they've made their choice and they've left the family and like they don't work there anymore. So why bring it up? So we don't really know what happened.
Man, I wish I could have been a fly on that wall because that is so not the story that she tells.
Right.
And then we hear this other story that's completely different. So, I mean, is it that the truth is somewhere in the middle as it is with most stories like this? Because, you know, that seems like, I mean, I don't know her, but we never heard anything like that on Suits. Like, you know, when she was an actress on Suits, did we hear that she was a bully on Suits?
Anybody who was like her level or above always has amazing things to say about her. She was so kind. She was always doing great things for the staff. She was amazing, blah, 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 blah. But anybody who ever worked with her in a lower capacity there have been a couple little inklings of people being like, yeah, no, she wasn't that great to everybody. She was great to people who could help her or who she needed to play nice with.
So this is how I always judged whether or not I was going to date a guy for longer than like one date. How he treated a server at a restaurant, how he treated a cashier in like a store, no matter if it's CVS or Publix or whatever, and how he treated the bartenders. If he treated those people with compassion and grace and tipped well, then we could go out again. But if there is for 1 second that he did not treat those people well, we were done. Never went out with him again. Like, I would end any relationship where someone didn't treat people that were serving them well. I think that's appalling. Like, I get it. Sometimes you get really bad service and it's becomes kind of, not awesome and you don't want to tip as much and blah, blah, blah. But if you've had a good experience and things are going well and you don't treat those people well, forget it. Like,
Yep.
you're out of here.
100%.
Don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you. Like, I don't put up with
agree.
that.
Yeah.
So,
and I think
anyway.
that's one of those things with Meghan where it kind of seems like, she was happy to play nice with anybody who could help her. People that she saw as beneath her, she was like, nope, you do what I say when I say it. And it seems like it did get to a point where, like, she wasn't even willing to play nice with people who were above her anymore in terms of how you look at her relationship with the royal family. She wasn't willing to play nice with William and Catherine, a future king and queen, anymore, because she felt she was owed their level of respect or deference that they were getting from the staff. She felt she should have had that too. Or maybe it was that she felt she was on the same level as them. And therefore, in the hierarchy of the offices, when she wasn't able to call the shots, even though she felt like she was their equal, she would get upset by that. And it's really funny because even if they were on the same level and there wasn't that, hierarchy of William and Catherine were going to be the future king and queen, she still was brand new to the role. Like, you still have to take into consideration the fact that, Kate had been doing that job for a decade before she showed up. So maybe she gets a little bit more respect just based on her tenure. And Meghan seemed to, like, if you look at the duration of time Meghan was a working royal, they left between the time she got married and the time they left was about a year and a half. And in that time, she had 72 official engagements. So in a year and a half, she essentially did, and granted, some of those engagements, they were across 2 tours, and tours are very grueling and they are long, and they're doing multiple engagements per day. But when you also consider, like, maybe they did 5 engagements in one day over the course of a week, and she only did 72 total, that's not a whole lot of work to have done. And for you to go throwing around your attitude as if you are changing the monarchy, where from where we can see, you're not even really showing up that much. I always thought that was very interesting. Like, just, as you would say, the hubris of it.
I do love that word.
I know.
Okay, so let's get to the Oprah interview.
Oprah. Oh my God. Okay. So the Oprah interview was, widely publicized. Everybody's waiting for this event to take place. And March 7th, the first part of it is released. And what we get during the Oprah interview is essentially just this, in my opinion, just a pity party. Meghan is out there dressed in a black dress. She's got heavy, dark eyeliner on, very reminiscent of Princess Diana. They're billing this as a nothing off limits interview. And she basically sits down and she says, I was very naive. I grew up not knowing much about the royal family. This wasn't something we followed.
Which is a lie.
Like, we have pictures of her at Buckingham Palace. We know from her best friend from childhood, they used to watch Princess Diana's wedding over and over again. Also, she lived in Canada. The Queen was on her money. I'm pretty sure at some point she may have Googled the royal family, as I'm sure everyone has at least once in the last few years, but especially when she realized she was going to be marrying into the family. I'm pretty sure she took a gander at how things work out. And so Oprah says to her, she says, but you were aware of the royals, and if you were going to marry into the royals, you do research about what that would mean. And Meghan responds, I didn't do any research about what that would mean. And Oprah says, you didn't do any research? And Meghan says, no, I didn't feel any need to, because everything I needed to know, he was sharing with me. Everything we thought I needed to know, he was telling me. He, of course, being Harry. So Meghan, one of the first things she says in the Oprah interview is, I, a a grown adult who went to one of the best universities in the country and some of the best schools in the country, and who has been in the spotlight for, at least 6 years now, because she had done Suits, and who had prepared for acting roles, did not prepare for the biggest role of her life and did no research on what it would mean to be a member of the royal family. And strict rules.
I call BS on that one.
Has to be, right? Like, come on. Has to be. There's just no way. And this is one of the places where I always say, if that's true, and it might be, I don't think so, because Meghan is smart. Like, we know she is a very intelligent woman. We know that she is meticulous in her planning. We know that she is, for lack of a better word, a little bit of a control freak. And I say that being also a control freak. So the fact that she would not do any research seems just literally impossible. But let's say it's true. What was Harry telling her? Like, she's saying
or not telling her.
Right. She's saying that she was relying on him. And it's like, okay, did he leave out all of the details? Like every single one? And
did he give you the first chapter and the last chapter and left out the middle?
I don't even know if he gave her those 2 chapters. I think he gave her like maybe the cover page, and that was pretty much it. And it says,
I just have to call BS on that. That's just that's baloney, pony. That is baloney. Because at any time, anyone at the palace could have sat down with her and said, hey, here's a little bit about what would happen if you took on this role.
Exactly.
Like, at any time.
Exactly. And so she goes on to say, she's talking about, because Oprah's again saying, like, didn't you have a conversation with him or with your friends? Like, didn't you give this some thought? And Meghan says, no, we thought a lot about what we thought it might be. I didn't fully understand what the job was. What does it mean to be a working royal? He and I were very aligned with our cause-driven work. That was part of our initial connection. But there was no way to understand what the day-to-day was going to be like. Now, keeping in mind, Harry has been a full-time working royal since like 2014, I think. So like, he's been a full-time working royal who understands the day-to-day for 6 years at this point. He very well knows what the job entails. And she's sitting there just playing dumb, essentially, which shocked me because she ain't stupid. She's not dumb. She's a smart, and like, it just baffled me. Like, that was and this was like right at the beginning of the episode or the interview. And this is one of the instances where I was like yelling at the TV, and I was like, no way. You did not just say that. Like, what a liar you are. Well, if you ever watch the interview back, Harry's face when he comes out, because at first it was just Meghan and then Harry joins her later. His face is like stone. Like, he looks furious.
And so uncomfortable.
So uncomfortable. It was as if, there were things that Meghan had said at the beginning of the interview, and then Oprah kind of circled back on to try to like, okay, let's talk to Harry about this. And he refused to answer the questions. He's like, I'm not gonna say. So it was almost like Meghan and Harry weren't on the same page, because she had gone into topics that he did not want to discuss. And this is supposed to be a no holds barred, anything goes interview. And Harry's like, I'm not going to get into that. And he looked angry, in my opinion. He looked so uncomfortable and a little bit angry at what was happening, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, that whole thing when she was talking about when they got into the very sticky wicket of different topics. And he kept saying, I'm not going to answer those questions. I'm not going to tell you who it was. I'm not, all of that. I felt like he was so uncomfortable. Like, he was like, can I please just get up and walk away?
Mm-hmm.
This feels terrible. It seemed very, very uncomfortable. Yeah. And I think at one point they were holding hands, right? In the interview.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have always felt like he was so completely besotted with her. and you just have to wonder, like, what was the dynamic there? I mean, they're putting all of their dirty laundry for the entire world to see. And he doesn't come from a family that has ever done that.
Right.
So it had to be terrifying and maddening. And I just don't understand why they did that interview in the first place, frankly.
I don't either. And it was so odd because Harry looked uncomfortable. She was just like blatantly lying at some point and like lying about things that, so like, for example, okay, the Kate, like Meghan made Kate cry conversation. Meghan to Oprah says the narrative with Kate, which didn't happen, was really, really difficult and something that I think that's when everything changed. 6 months after the wedding, which we know they had already basically been planning to leave before they even got married. But she says that's when everything changed. And Oprah says, you say the narrative with Kate didn't happen. So specifically, did you make Kate cry? And Meghan says, no. And Oprah says, so where did that come from? And Meghan sighs. And then Oprah says, was there a situation where she might have cried or she could have cried? And Meghan says, no, the reverse happened. And I don't say that to be disparaging to anyone because it was a really hard week of the wedding. And she was upset about something, but she owned it and she apologized and she brought me flowers and a note apologizing. And she did what I would do if I knew I hurt someone, to take accountability for it. And it's like, wait a second. You just said 2 minutes ago it didn't happen, but now you're turning around and saying, no, it did happen. She made me cry. And it was just like a, wait, what? Like on live TV, or I guess not live TV, but pre-recorded TV, you just contradicted yourself. And then they go on to talk about, she gives more details about there was a confrontation over the dresses. And Meghan says, I've forgiven her, even though 2 seconds before she had said, I don't want to be disparaging about anybody. It was a hard week. She was upset, but she owned it. And then Meghan says, I've forgiven her. And it's like, wait, I thought we weren't disparaging anybody. I thought this wasn't a big deal. I thought that, like, it was just such a weird little like twisty turny train ride of a conversation where you could tell that Meghan was trying to pass the blame and trying to say, like, I'm the victim here. Like Kate's not a victim. I'm a victim. And then she says, this is the part where she says something along the lines of, it was really frustrating because they would lie to protect her, but they wouldn't even tell the truth for me. And she's implying that Kensington Palace, when the rumors were coming out, Meghan made Kate cry, Kensington Palace wouldn't correct the narrative and wouldn't say, no, it was Kate who made Meghan cry. And that upset Meghan a lot. And we know from Spare that was a huge issue for them. But Meghan never acknowledges the fact that, like, even though Oprah straight up asked her, she never acknowledges the fact that, like, yeah, maybe Kate also cried. Like, Kate was 2 weeks postpartum at this point. She probably cried. She probably cried about a lot of things because, again, we don't know her well enough to talk about her hormones, but I bet a lot of stuff might have made her cry.
Cried it. Yeah, I just cried at the new Amazon commercial. I don't know if you've seen it, but like
not.
Almost anything can make me cry. Oh, it's fantastic. It's these three little old ladies on a bench. I recommend it to anybody. Go look up. I think it's called The Joy of Christmas or something like that for Amazon. It's fantastic, but it made me cry. Like, I can cry easily. I think lots of people can cry easily, particularly women who are postpartum, or in the middle of wedding planning, or trying to dress their daughters for wedding planning. I just think that all of the things that they do to try to increase their brand presence and to make them seem strong and to make them seem like they have something that the other royals do not, only solidifies for me that they're missing something. There's something missing, fundamentally missing from the brand that they built. There just seems to be something fundamentally missing from their brand that would make it successful.
Yeah. And I think that the element that is missing is self-awareness every single time. Because what Meghan and Harry seem to consistently do is put out their version of the truth, forgetting that things can be fact-checked, that other people also have a version of the truth that they may like to share. And they never seem to realize their audience or how something's going to come off. So one of the things that was the biggest flop that Meghan has done is after the extremely, excruciatingly, horrifically tragic school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, where, you know, the world was horrified by this event. Meghan goes to the school with a camera crew in tow to place flowers at a memorial. Took a private jet to fly to Texas from California with a camera crew and had photos taken that were published in tabloids. And it's like, oh my God, how did you possibly think that was not going to look like the most disgusting, self-serving act ever? Like, it was so, I was like so insulted on behalf of every family who was affected by that, because it was just such a gross publicity stunt. And it, like, at some point, Meghan sat down and thought, oh yeah, this is a good idea. And it's like, no. Whoever told you it was a good idea should be fired. Like, the lack of self-awareness with them is where they mess up every single time, I think, personally.
Well, you see it a lot on their Twitter account when they try to put out, you know, messages of support for different countries or different conflicts or whatever. And people, you know, come clap back immediately and are like, we don't care about your opinion because you aren't really, you're not anybody of note. You don't do great humanitarian work.
Right.
You're not part of the royal family. Why are you commenting on this? You're just two private citizens.
Right. Like, why are you playing at being, like, the thing is, even if they were, like, you know, the royals, heads of state, whoever, politicians, they put out statements like that. You don't really see celebrities do it, you know? Like, that's not even a thing a celebrity does. But Harry and Meghan do it every single time. And it's just like, why? Who do you think you are? And it always goes back to, for me, like, they quit their job because they didn't want to play by the rules. It wasn't that they didn't like the job or the attention. They just didn't like the rules. And so they threw a temper tantrum that has now lasted, like, going on 4 years. And they quit. And they thought, oh, everybody's going to see it our way. And what actually has happened is everybody, not everybody, because there's still a lot of people who do like them, but a lot of people, the more they've tried to strike out on their own, the more people have been like, oh, you're really disingenuous. You're really self-serving. You really don't seem to care about anything other than how you're perceived in this situation that has nothing to even do with you. And also, by the way, you didn't realize you were going to be perceived in a probably negative light by doing it.
So during that interview with Oprah, she talked about a lot of really explosive things, like she was depressed and suicidal for a time. And she said she got no help from Kensington Palace, no help from the family at all. But that doesn't make sense to me because William and Prince William and Kate and Harry started Heads Up, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't, or like Heads Together, Heads Together, or Heads Up. Oh, Heads Up's that awesome game you play with your kids where you guess things. Just not Heads Up, Heads Together. So that seems to be in direct conflict with what they were trying to accomplish as part of their royal household, right? And by the way, I'm not refuting that she was depressed or suicidal whatsoever, because we don't know what anyone's going through at any time. So I'm not refuting that at all. We have all, almost everyone I've ever known has been depressed at one time or another. And I've known many, many people who were, you know, either parasuicidal or suicidal. And we can't begin to understand all of that because everyone is different. And I come from a family that was very involved in the mental health field. So I'm not taking that away from her in any way. What I am questioning is that she says she got no help, and that makes no sense to me.
Right. Yeah. And again, like, to echo what you're saying, like, I don't doubt that she was feeling some sort of way. What I do doubt is that everything happened in the way that she said. So she says in Oprah, or to Oprah during the interview, you know, I was desperate for help. And so I went to This is like so weird. So she went to the palace HR office and was like, I need help. And they were like, I'm really sorry, but we can't help you with that. Because the thing is, the HR office that handles human resources for employees of the royal family does not handle anything to do with the principals of the royal family. So this was literally not this person's job. There was nothing this person could do, because that would be like if I just walked into like a random company and was like, hey, I need your employee benefits to be applied to me. They'd be like, well, you don't work here, so we can't do that. And that's essentially what happened. Meghan makes it seem as if she walked in and someone was like, nope, get out. We don't care what happens to you. And that was not necessarily the case. I think it was more a case of she asked for help and the person she spoke with was like, I'm sorry, that's not our department. You know what I mean? Like we can't really help you here because like you're not an employee. You don't have health insurance through the palace. Like that's not how this works. Now, interestingly, during this point, and I love to bring this up anytime this conversation happens, it's like one of my favorite things. At this time, Meghan was very heavily pregnant. She was like 30 weeks pregnant, 32-ish weeks pregnant or something like that. It was very close to around the time that Archie was going to be born. And so Meghan was under the care of a doctor. And so let's forget the fact that she has a brother-in-law, a sister-in-law, and a husband who have started a mental health foundation and who undoubtedly have access to many mental health professionals at their fingertips. Let's pretend her husband doesn't also go to therapy and have the number of a therapist in his phone. Meghan is under the care of a doctor. She very easily could have been like, hey, I need an emergency appointment with my OB. I think something might be wrong with the baby. And those royal protection officers would have whisked her to the nearest hospital so that she could, like, you know, if she didn't want to tell them, I'm feeling depressed, whatever. I am 100% positive she could have been seen by a doctor confidentially by just saying, hey, I need to see my OB, something about the baby. And she probably would have got an appointment within an hour of making that phone call. She didn't do that, apparently. But you know what they did do? They didn't try to get her a doctor's appointment, apparently. They didn't try to reach out to any of their mental health professional friends to get her help. But a few weeks later, they did invite a reporter who covers mental health. They invited a reporter into their home, but they did not ask this person for help. It like baffles me that she was insisting she couldn't get help, and yet she was able to invite a reporter who covers mental health into her home. But then she says, nobody would help me. I could not get any help. And it's like, I've just identified 9 different ways you could have got help. It just kind of seems like to me, you didn't try that hard. And also, assuming everything is true, which again, I'm not trying to say she wasn't feeling some sort of way, but assuming this is all true, when she told her husband she was feeling suicidal, his solution was that she get dressed, get her hair done, and go to an event that night. And there are pictures of them at an event. And she's wearing this like beautiful sparkly dress and she looks lovely and he looks so handsome. And like that was his solution, was like, okay, well, let's go to work. And it's like, what kind of husband is that? Like, why is everyone dropping the ball everywhere and nobody is doing the sensible thing of like, just call this woman's doctor? Like, she has one, she's pregnant. She's probably seeing her doctor every 2 weeks at this point anyway, because that's like the stage of her pregnancy she was at. So why don't you just call her doctor and be like, hey, I need some help here. Like, nobody did that. And it just makes me, I don't know. It's just another one of those things where it's like, I want to believe what she said and I don't want to discredit what she said. And I'm sure the pressure of being in that position is so intense that yes, she was feeling depressed and yes, she may have had suicidal ideation. The way every single person dropped the ball when these are all supposed to be like competent adults seems almost impossible.
It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me. And she is a grown ass woman.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you need help, like I don't care if you go down to the local GP at the NIH, like go get some help.
Right.
Like that doesn't compute for me at all. And I just don't believe that. I mean, did Harry refute that he said that? I mean, did he really say to her, "Oh, so sorry, you're suicidal. Let's go out tonight"? I just don't believe that.
He basically said that what he said was that he didn't want her, like he had this event that he had to go to. And again, like if someone told me they were suicidal, I wouldn't be like, well, listen, I got to go to work. So like get your shit together or like deal with it. Like, no, I would be like, okay, I'm canceling everything. I will be here for you. What are we doing? What's the plan? Let's get you to a doctor. Like, you know what I mean? Like I would spring into action to help this person. And Harry said,
a stranger. You would spring into action to help a stranger.
Yes,
like
literally.
It's not just
if somebody walked up to me on the street and was like, yeah. And apparently her husband, she said to him, like she told him, like, this is how I'm feeling. And he was like, okay, well, I have this event to go to tonight. I don't want you to be alone. So why don't you come with me? And like, that was his solution. Let's get you dressed. Let's put you in a pretty dress and do your hair and makeup and you come to work with me. And like, that is also just baffling to me because like, what? Like, what kind of shitty husband is that? Like, that just seems like the shittiest husband on the planet. And again, this is from a man who has started a mental health foundation, who has made it his life's work to support mental wellness, who now to this day has a salary job at a company that, you know, deals with mental health. And it's like, bro, your wife told you she felt like she was going to kill herself and your suggestion was like, go make yourself pretty and come smile for the cameras. Like, what planet is this on?
I just don't believe it. Or if he did do that, like that's the most tone deaf thing I've ever heard in all my life.
If he did that, like she should have divorced him. If that is all true,
right,
and that was his response, she should have been like, okay, I need to find myself a new husband because this one's not great at the job.
It doesn't, that whole part to me, just, I don't doubt for a minute she was depressed or suicidal or had suicidal ideation. I don't doubt that at all.
Right.
What I do doubt is that she was unable to get help.
Right.
Because
there was a million ways to get help.
Yeah. And she has all of the resources in the world. Like literally, you know,
right.
Like it doesn't.
And I understand that she may have wanted, you know, privacy. She may have been worried about her privacy and confidentiality and all of that.
Except here she is on Oprah.
Right. Here she is on Oprah. But I get it. You know, if she was feeling depressed and suicidal and she's in a very like delicate, vulnerable state and she certainly she was still a working member of the family at that point. So she wouldn't have wanted that information to get out, leaked to the press. I understand her being like, okay, how do I get this help without people knowing? How do I get this help without it becoming tabloid fodder? But again, she invited a reporter into her home to talk about mental health, like very shortly thereafter. So it's like, if you can get a reporter into your home, you can probably get a doctor into your home without people knowing. And again,
well, her gynecologist.
Yeah. She could have just said, I have to go to a doctor appointment. Like, oh, I'm pregnant.
Yeah.
And if she had said, you know, like, I think something's wrong with the baby, I need to be seen by my doctor right away, she would have had an appointment in 15 minutes. Like,
or
you
less.
Know, it just, I don't know. That whole part just made my head spin because I was like, this doesn't make sense because it makes Harry seem like the biggest jerk and the worst husband on the planet. And she's okay with that his solution was, okay, get dressed and come to work with me. Like, what? No. And then also like these two people, between the two of them, could not figure out a way to get her a doctor's appointment. Like, no, I'm sorry. No, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And then the other part that I know was a big part of the interview that I don't want to talk about is the part where she, said there was racism involved from the royal family against her. But I don't think that you and I have the, I think that we would need to be better equipped than we are to talk about that piece of it. But I wouldn't mind talking about it another time when we have, maybe some guests that can come and talk to us about that as well. I don't know. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that some of the things that she said and that she was using as evidence are, like I had said before, things that are factually untrue, because she was saying, like, he was going to be denied security where like other children wouldn't have been, but like my son was going to be. And, he wouldn't be a prince at the time. They didn't know if it was a boy or girl. We didn't know if a prince or princess they were going to get their prince or princess title, even though they were entitled to it, and all this stuff. And she starts citing like letters patent. At one point she brings up like a letters patent of like 1914 or something, or 1934. I can't remember which one. And she's saying that like the reason he wasn't going to get security and the reason he wouldn't be titled is because, like, strictly because of his biracial status. But the fact of the matter is he wasn't going to have security because infants don't get security in the royal family because the babies are always with their parents and their parents have security. Now, at a time later when he was older and, more independent, going to school and stuff, not every royal has security. William's children, we know William and Kate have full-time security. We know George has full-time security as the future king. I believe Charlotte and Louis have security by the fact that they're always with their parents or their brother. And they may have 24/7 security because they are the children of the future monarch. But like other grandchildren of monarchs. So if you want to say, okay, well, Archie would have been the grandson of a monarch, his grandfather is now King Charles, the grandchild of a monarch, he's entitled to security. Well, Beatrice and Eugenie don't have full-time security. Zara and Peter never have had security ever. The York princesses had it for a while. It was stripped, I think, like a decade ago. Pretty much everybody lost their security. So Meghan was trying to say he's not getting security because this is a race thing. And maybe, I don't think that's necessarily true, but I think it's more likely that he wasn't going to get security because he was a baby and his parents had full-time security, so he didn't really need it. And then he would have followed the same path that every other member of the royal family has, which is that none of them have full-time security, period. And then the other thing was about him being called, whether he would have a title, whether he would be the prince or a prince. And she said, they made the exception for William's children, but they wouldn't make the exception for my child, implying again that this was a race issue. When actually the exception had been made for William's children because William is the future king. And so his children, the way the letters patent had been written up until I think 2012 was that the children of a monarch were titled and the male line grandchildren of a monarch were titled. But the great grandchildren of the monarch were not titled. At the time, that's because it didn't really matter. Their people, didn't live that long and there weren't that many generations running around. But so she was saying she wanted Archie to be titled from birth as George, Charlotte, and Louis were titled from birth. And the only reason that exception was made is because they were the children of the future king. Archie and Lily, theoretically, and we have seen that this did happen, as soon as King Charles became the king and they became the male line grandchildren of the monarch, they got their titles. It happened. It legally happened at that moment. It would have had to have been written into law that it didn't happen in order for them to have not gotten their titles. She just wanted them to be titled at birth And she wanted the same exception to have been made for Archie as was made for George, the future king. And it was just kind of like, was that racism? I don't, like you said, like, I'm not equipped to answer that. I don't know. But when I look at the facts of the legality behind the letters patent and how titles are distributed, it didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary was happening. It was just that she wasn't getting the thing she wanted when she wanted it. So
what titles did they get when Charles became king? What titles were conferred?
So as soon as Charles became king, Archie and Lily became Prince Archie of Sussex and Princess Lily of Sussex, or Lilibet, I guess, of Sussex. Interestingly, and this is like another funny thing, Harry is the Duke of Sussex and the Earl of Dumbarton. He has a secondary title, a subsidiary title. I think he also has a baronetcy too, but I don't know what that one is off the top of my head. But so he has a subsidiary title. From birth, Archie was entitled to be called the Earl of Dumbarton. So Archie technically was titled right away. Harry and Meghan did not want him to be referred to as the Earl of Dumbarton. They wanted him to be referred to as Master Archie. And that was a statement that they put out. But legally, Archie's held a title his whole life. Prince Edward, the Queen's youngest son, he was the Earl of Wessex. And his son, James, was Viscount Severn his whole life. His whole entire life, he was Viscount Severn. When his father became Duke of Edinburgh, once his brother conferred the title on him after his father's, the whole thing. But then now James is now the Earl of Wessex. He took his father's subsidiary title. That's how the titles work. The eldest son takes the subsidiary title of their father. So Archie has been entitled to hold a title. It's not his in his own right. He's just holding it for his dad. But he's had a title since he was born. They just didn't want to use it. And then as soon as Charles became king, Archie and Lily became prince and princess. Because their parents are not allowed to use their HRHs, Archie and Lily do not use theirs either. There was, for a period of time, a bit of confusion about whether or not Archie and Lily were going to get to use the prince and princess title. And it just took it being, I think when Lily was baptized, the Sussexes put out a statement that said, Princess Lilibet was baptized or whatever. And that was the first time that we got confirmation of, okay, they are using their titles as the male line grandchildren of a monarch, just as has always been their right since he became the king. So like that was another thing that when I was watching the interview, I think I threw a pillow at the TV when she was saying that, because I was like, no, legally, that's not how that works. Like you don't just get to say, make him a prince because I want him to be. Like, there's a process and a procedure, and the exception was made for William's children because William was the future king, and William's oldest child, whether male or female, was going to be, it's like a whole thing because they changed how the order of succession worked. So basically the exception was made so that if William's child was a female, she would be titled princess from birth, because if William's oldest child was a male, he would have automatically been titled prince from birth, which is what happened anyway. But like, if it had been a girl first, she would have just been Lady Charlotte. For example, if it was Charlotte who was born first, she would have just been Lady Charlotte. And she would have been styled as the daughter of a duke rather than as the future monarch. And so they made the exception because of that very specific reason, because the order of succession changed.
Well, didn't Elizabeth want a female child to be able to be queen?
Exactly. Yeah. So in 2012, they changed the order of succession. They went from male preference primogeniture to absolute primogeniture. So male or female born first, like whoever's born first, you get to be monarch, even if you have a younger brother after. But what they didn't want was for, if William and Kate had a daughter, she would not be a princess from birth, even though she was the future queen. Because that would just, like, it wouldn't be that weird, but like, a little bit weird.
Fair's fair.
Yeah. So they were just trying to be like, all right, if the future queen is born, she gets to be a princess right off the bat. that was the exception that was made. And that was the exception that Meghan said, because they didn't do it for my kid, maybe that was a little bit racist. And it was like, maybe it was. I don't know. Maybe they are a very racist family and that's what was happening. But your kids still have their titles. Like, you know what I mean? Like all this time later, they have them. They got them.
Right.
There was never a letters patent put out saying that they would not get them. And it's just, I don't know. That was one of the things I literally threw a pillow at my TV because I was like, that is not how that works. And I get very heated about it, as you can tell.
Well, my guess is that there are very few people who know how it works. And so it's easy to talk about it in an interview because maybe 1% of 1% of people know that that's how that royal succession works.
Exactly.
And you just happen to be one of those 1% of 1%.
Yeah, I need different hobbies.
Again, yeah, it's true. Maybe a couple. Well, I will say though, for the rest of that piece of the talk, I don't think that you and I are qualified to talk about whether or not there was racism or there wasn't racism. I think we would have to interview other people and kind of talk through the logistics of how that happens and what the perceptions are and all of the sensitivities around that. And I don't think we can do that. So we'll have to leave that here. But I think that this is a good place for us to take a pause for the next episode because we have, in the next episode coming up, we have Prince Philip's funeral just a couple of months later, I guess just a month later. And then we have the lawsuit and then the content deals with Spotify and Netflix and all the books publishing and then the Queen dying and then Spotify and what they said. And can I just preview the next couple of episodes? One of the things, and this is truth, this was printed, is that wasn't it Bill Simmons who called them for the Spotify deal, called them fucking grifters?
Yeah.
I'm sorry for the explicit.
Yeah, he sure did. Yeah. And he was the
head
of Spotify podcast. Like his title is that he is the head of Spotify podcast. And he essentially was their boss and called them fucking grifters, which is not great.
Not awesome.
No.
So we have all that coming up. I think we'll be able to wrap this all up in the next episode and talk through all that. I think either one or two more, but definitely we're going to pick up at Prince Philip's.
I feel like we've been saying one or two more for like 5 episodes.
I know, but we're almost done, and I just kind of feel like we need to just finish this and then talk about like why the brand imploded. Like I think we'll have a little recap at the end. Why the brand didn't work, why it imploded, and if there is redemption, like what that would look like for them, like how could they redeem their brand? Because I mean, I don't think it's impossible. One of the reasons we do this show is because we want to talk about how brands implode or have problems and how they do find redemption or they don't find redemption and why we think that happens or doesn't happen.